it's really crucial that the lease terms be understood. Because bottom line, that's going to determine how much the cash flow is and thus the value of the property.
Yeah.
Investors need to have good counsel. They need to have attorneys, real estate brokers, title companies that know what they're doing.
Welcome back to the REI-NWA Podcast. This is podcast number 45. My name is Coley Bailey. I'm the principal broker at Lone Rock Realty. And today we once again have the illustrious Steve Mansfield. Thanks for being here again.
Glad to be back.
And I'm going to let people go back to our previous podcast for your whole background. You're an amazing commercial broker. You have so many years of experience. And out of that experience has come a really interesting case study.
Yes.
That is really a nightmare of a commercial lease that we're gonna talk through some of these details. Now we are gonna have a builder's circle meeting on September 3rd, 2024, and you're actually going to be able to put the lease up on the screen and go through it and have Q&A and let everybody dissect this in person. But just for the podcast, give us a little bit of background on how you came about this, and I'll let you get into it.
Sure. And I hope a lot of people turn out for this because I think it's a great educational opportunity. Not many of our investor members, I think, have been through a thick, real commercial lease. So, right. And if they have, that's great. But I will take them through the whole thing. So this all came about by me noticing a property that had been on the market for a while and had just expired. And as I sometimes do, if I find something interesting, I'll call the owner and see if I can help them understand why maybe it didn't sell or still on the market. And oftentimes that has to do with price.
Yeah.
But in this case, it wasn't quite that simple.
And the numbers looked really good.
They did.
Right?
Yeah. So let me give you some of the background.
Let's start there. Yeah.
So background. So this is a property that is actually made up of two buildings on one parcel, two buildings and a piece of land. So there is a single parcel from a real estate tax perspective. There's a building on it that is an older hotel that the owner is in the middle of rehabbing and turning into apartments.
Okay.
And then there is a restaurant and living quarters. They call it the condo space, but it's a very nice restaurant and it's attractive and supposedly had a pretty good track record up until this transaction. The property had been on the market for a couple of years and didn't sell. The terms of the deal were, and what I was told on the phone, is that the tenant was paying $9,000 a month.
Okay.
So pretty good number, 100, I think that works out to 108, yep. 100,000 a year. And it was being offered at 600,000 or 660. Which would be a pretty nice return.
Right.
The lease was supposed to be triple net. For those that don't understand that or aren't familiar with that term, that means that the tenant would be paying all the expenses of the building. And so I went up there with the understanding and went to go take a look at the property that I would be discussing selling the restaurant. Owner gave me a nice tour of everything. We went through the restaurant. It was well equipped, all sorts of equipment, kitchen equipment, and so forth that went through it. And it wasn't owned by the tenant. That went along with the property. That's a very nice plus. And we started talking a little bit about kind of how this whole thing came about. And he had a new tenant, basically, that had been in there for a year. Wasn't doing quite so well. The prior tenant that had run the restaurant was doing better. And he wanted to sell it. And I said, okay, that's fine. Let's take a look at how we're going to split the property. And we discussed doing a lot split so that the hotel apartment building was a separate lot from the restaurant. And he said he was going to take care of that. I asked him for a copy of the lease to review, so I was familiar with the cash flows. And that's where this all started to become really interesting. I first noticed, and when reading a lease or when going through due diligence, whether it's a single tenant building like a restaurant or a multi-tenant building like an office building or a retail center, it's really crucial that the lease terms be understood. Because bottom line, that's going to determine how much the cash flow is and thus the value of the property.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a pretty thick commercial lease. And I started reading through it. I was kind of amazed. We started off, as most leases do, with definitions. It talks about the demised property. Then it talks about the buildings. Then it talks about how they integrate with each other. And I started looking at the definitions, and they were not making sense to me. So in one paragraph, the premises referred to just the restaurant building. In another paragraph, it referred to all of the buildings on the property.
Okay.
And this becomes an issue going forward. Okay. It has an impact on obligations of both parties. For example, one of the paragraphs in the lease says that the tenant is responsible for the maintenance of the premises, which refers to both buildings.
Okay.
So even though he's only renting the restaurant and should be responsible for the maintenance of that building,
Yeah.
he's actually responsible for the maintenance of both.
So it's triple net on both of them.
That's what that paragraph said.
Wow.
And then another paragraph refuted it.
Okay.
It was different. So there's all of these conflicts in the lease. I'll share a few more in a moment.
Okay.
Okay.
So it seems like there's parts and pieces of multiple different leases that might have gotten
Well, I eventually
smushed
got
together.
there. And as I'm reading through the lease, there's some notices that maybe the font is different.
Oh.
Maybe there's some clues that things had been changed and moved.
So we're looking at a Frankenlease.
I think that's a great word.
Okay.
Frankenlease.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So Frankenlease. We should have held this until October is what we should have done.
Well, we're getting near close. It's okay.
We're getting pretty close.
Yes, there may be a update in October.
Okay.
We'll see what happens.
All right.
So anyway, I'm going through it and I'm finding several issues and I'll just give you the big ones. So for example, the tenant has the right to purchase the property anytime during the initial term. So the initial term was 10 years.
Okay.
It was a year into it. We had 9 years left. And then there's another 10-year option. Normally, a tenant would have the right of first refusal. So if the owner wants to sell, they would go to the tenant and say, listen, I'm selling. I'm going to put it on the market. If I get an offer, you have first right to buy it for that price if you want. If you don't, you go away.
Okay.
And I'll sell it. But that wasn't written that way. It was written as at any time during the first 10 years, the tenant gets to buy the building at market value. If I'm going to list this property for sale and I find a buyer, that buyer is going to know because they're going to read the lease that if they're paying, let's call it $600,000 for the property, that the tenant has the right to buy it the very next day.
Yeah.
And it says it's at market price, but it doesn't define what market price is.
Right.
It says both parties, tenant and landlord, will each get their own appraiser. Okay, that's good.
So which one do you go with?
But yeah, the problem is there's no, what happens if they don't come up with the same number, which normally is the case, right?
That's
No
normally
two
the
appraisers
case.
are going to get the same thing.
Right.
A well-drafted clause with regard to that would say something on the order of each party will hire their own appraiser. If there's a difference of more than 10%, then those two appraisers would pick a third appraiser who would look at the appraisals and make a decision on the actual value, and that'll be what the sale price is. Or if it's less than 10%, they'll just take the average number. But it doesn't say that. Lots of open issues. There's another piece that started to bother me as I'm reading it, is that the triple net lease required any tenants or any guests, of the restaurant, had the right to use all the parking on the building, on the premises, and the premises are defined as both buildings. So now the landlord, as he's renovating his apartments, has no parking for his tenants.
Right.
He wasn't aware of it. I went up to him, I said, listen, I have a lot of issues with this lease. And I started going through them. I said, I want to come up and talk to you about them. So I went up and we met. We started discussing them. I said, so how's things going? He said, well, tenant's not doing so well. Not as well as I thought. We're a year in and we're starting to have squabbles. He said, so what do you think we should list it for? I said, I'm sorry. I don't think you can sell it.
Yeah.
And he kind of shocked him.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, this is just a very small amount of the discrepancies and confusion in the lease. And I didn't read it myself. I had a couple of my associates read it as well. We went through everything and tried to figure out what's the right
Yeah.
Right thing to do.
When it opens one door, but it never finishes. If you're mixing and matching things, they don't match up because they're coming from. That would be
very frustrating.
You get into a lot of trouble.
You do, and it ends up being a big lawsuit.
Yeah.
So I said to him, so this is what really shocked me. And again, when investing in commercial real estate, this is not always so simple. Investors need to have good counsel. Mm-hmm. They need to have attorneys, real estate brokers, title companies that know what they're doing. And I said, so did your lawyer draft this? It was quiet. He said, no, I didn't have a lawyer for it. I said, oh, so what happened? Did you draft it? And he puts his head down. He says, no, I let the tenant draft the lease.
Oh, yeah.
Most of the things in the lease are very tenant oriented. For example, and you have dealt with leases, I'm sure you know. So it says in the lease that, and it's normal to get a little grace period if you're late with your rent, right? 5 days, 10 days. This says that if the tenant has failed to pay their rent for 30 days, then the landlord may give notice of default and evict after 30 days after the notice, in one paragraph.
Okay.
In another paragraph, instead of 60 days, it's 90 days. So the tenant can go for 3 months without ever paying before being evicted, right? So anyway, we decided to talk a little bit about what he should do. And he was a little concerned. Obviously, he would like to recover some money, sell the property. And my view is when you have a lease that's this confusing and doesn't make sense, that you need to blow it all up.
Yeah.
Right? It's time to put Frankenstein to bed.
Because, commercial property is only worth what money it can make someone.
Exactly.
Right? So if there's no real clear way of seeing a cash flow and seeing a profit come out of the property, what's it worth? Maybe something
it's
indefinable. Basically,
it is indefinable, and it really makes it difficult for both parties, landlord and tenant in this case, and certainly for another investor.
Yeah.
So I sat down with him and I said, "Look, I don't think it's saleable at the moment. The lease is a mess. You really need to get some attorneys involved, and you need to get the tenant and you to sit down and renegotiate all these points." So I drafted a nice big memo to him about everything that I saw that was in conflict. He agreed he was going to do that. So we may have an October meeting to see if it's worked.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, these are really not unusual clauses that professionals would draft.
Right.
Right. The fact that it looks like there are two leases put together with different definitions has huge impact on what it means.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to sharing this at our meeting, because I think the details are going to get very interesting.
Yeah. And I'm sure there are going to be some good questions that come from the audience and everyone too. So yeah, this is really interesting. Thanks for sharing this with us.
Sure.
I think this is going to be a good episode to kind of unlock some thought process here. Because I always like to think at least 3 steps ahead.
Yes.
It's just, and it's not always possible. You're never going to see every scenario. You're never going to see every variable. But at least before moving forward, stopping before taking a large action and thinking, oh, do I know what the next step or two is actually going to be based on what I'm about to do? And at least trying to think through some of those scenarios.
Well, and I understand for a lot of people, reading legal documents is intimidating.
Yeah.
Right. But when you're dealing with a large legal document, a large lease,
absolutely,
and you're talking about investing hundreds of thousands of dollars, read the documents.
Yep.
Right. And if you're not going to read them, at least have
somebody
an attorney or a broker who can understand them before entering into any kind of transaction.
Absolutely. Very important.
It is very important.
It
is very important. So that's kind of what I'm facing. I just thought it was fabulous, interesting, fun. Luckily, not my deal, right?
Okay.
And so for me, I didn't get what I was going for, which was a listing on a restaurant.
Right.
But I think I've helped somebody, And
well, that's the game.
It is the game.
Yeah.
It's what it's all about.
All right. So for anyone listening, make sure to come to our Builders Circle meeting. It's going to be on September 3rd, 2024. It's a new location for us. So it's actually at Rendezvous Junction in Rogers. So look that up, Rendezvous Junction. We're going to go over this nightmare commercial lease in a little more depth. So come on out and see that. As usual, $0 at the door if you're an REI-NWA member, $20 if you're not, but you should probably just go ahead and get that membership so you can come to all 4 events every single month, all throughout the year. And
a lot of knowledge and a lot of fun.
Yeah, we're a lot of fun and great network of people to meet here in Northwest Arkansas. Literally any specialty within real estate. I think we've got somebody for it.
Probably do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right, guys, that's it for this podcast. We'll catch you on the next one.